Niccolo Machiavelli is going to be the next entry in my Anyone But Che series, which is an ongoing series that I have. And I'm just saying, actually knowing who Che Guevara is, pretty much anyone but Che Guevara would be better to be wearing on a shirt with that aesthetically pleasing design. So to go along with this speed drawing, I will be reading from Discorsi sopra la prima decca di Tito Livio, which is the discourses on Livy. And a bit about this series. First of all, I'm trying to sell merchandise on this. So there's a Redbubble link somewhere, or you can find Redbubble link to somewhere wherever you're actually getting this. And I have several other things on there. And when I've been recording videos, people have been correcting me that it is actually Che Guevara and not Che Guevara, as I've been saying. But I kind of like how anyone but Che sounds better than anyone but Che. But let me know. Okay, so with that also, that convention of that letter making the Che sound rather than the Ke sound, where did that come to me? Why was I thinking that to begin with? Okay, with my background, born in France, came back to Kenya, then went to the United States of America, finished off school in Italy and spent some time there. So I learned the Italian language while I was out there, and then it was like, there's no letter K in the Italian language. So CH often makes a K sound. So I think the Machiavelli was there, and I don't know how this came. I'm forgetting how who I was listening to, what I was listening to, that this particular excerpt on exiles, listening to exiles, came up and decided to go look it up. But I also was looking for the actual discourses and find the thing so I can read this thing and use it as part of this thing that I'm doing with the Anyone But Che series. And I remember typing Machiavelli because of the Tupac thing, and that was with the K. So I wondered if the Tupac people actually even understand that aspect of it, or are they just going off of the way it sounded, and then they did that in that sense. Okay, so Anyone But Che series. Part of this was I remember being in Kenya some time back, years back, and it really struck me. And this is a common thing in Kenya. A lot of people just wear shirts because it's just the clothes that they get from the markets. They're not necessarily making a fashion statement or trying to make some sort of political statement with what's on their actual shirt, the words or the things. Like sometimes you'll just see somebody walking down the street with like a Griswold family reunion. You can tell it was just like overprinted from the Griswold family, and then it got sent to some consignment to the third world, and then somehow got it into some market where these people just go and buy like bundles, like literal huge hay bales sort of things, of bales of clothing, and they just sort through, and then like they sell those out in markets. So the person wearing it is not because they're part of the Griswold, because they don't even know what family reunion sort of things are. It's just something they'd wear. So this Che Guevara person wearing shirt, I was wondering, okay, this person was younger, so maybe they actually were aware of it. But then I think most of the people in the United States of America who actually are wearing that as some sort of socio-political statement, how many of them have actually looked into the background of who Che Guevara was? And would they still support wearing him as a shirt if they personally knew this individual? If Che Guevara existed today and he was doing what he was doing today in Cuba, would they think like this is somebody I still want to support in this way? And I think there's many people who would not. I think majority of the people who wear this stuff don't know who he is, and if they actually knew, would not be as supportive as wearing it. And that just led me to thinking like, hey, there's a lot of other people, and I think I've done at least like 20 different people on this, so you can check out those other ones and see about that then. So does Machiavelli qualify for this anyone but Che thing in the whole premise and idea of it? I think the first person I did was the Meacham guy. What's his name? Let me double check. Yeah, Count Dankula, Mark Meacham. There was a time there was some fervor because he had a bug named Buddha, and he trained it to raise his paw in a Nazi salute to respond to anti-Semitic phrases. And people flipped out about this. It's like, oh, let's cancel them, let's ban him, let's this and this. And like, okay, it's words. And it was, in my estimation, the same sort of people who would wear Che Guevara shirts, which may actually be on side a bit with something Che Guevara was doing with banning books and burning books and banning certain music and things like that, suppressing certain freedoms. He was a Marxist. He was involved with overseeing execution squads. He had racist and bigoted views. He was actually supposedly actually shot actual people in certain cases. He was a counter-revolutionary, engaged in actual military that's actually going out and ending people's lives, rubblizing places and things like that. So if Che Guevara could be on a shirt, then why not Count Dankula and his girlfriend's pod Buddha? And that was the general theme for this series. So the Machiavelli himself, here's something that I got from Britannica about him. So who was Niccolo Machiavelli? He was an Italian Renaissance political philosopher and statesman and secretary in the Florentine Republic. His most famous work, The Prince, in 1532, brought him a reputation as an atheist and an immoral cynic. An atheist, okay, but immoral cynic, I don't know if I kind of fit in that one. But What did Niccolo Machiavelli write? His most important works are the discourses on Livy, which I said I'm going to be reading excerpts from, and the Prince that was mentioned before. Both were published after his death. He wrote several other works, including the Florentine Histories and the life of Castracani of Lucca. Now, with this coming up right here, do you guys also kind of notice that sometimes people will say a certain word or certain name and then they'll go into the accent like it's in that language? Like when I say Machiavelli, I'm just like Niccolo Machiavelli, but it's like Niccolo Machiavelli when I'm regularly speaking my regular language. This is something that happens also, like someone will be like, and we're talking about what Trump did in Venezuela, and then they'll go back to just talking about the regular thing, or they'll be like, yeah, and then he kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. Hey, Nicolas Maduro. That's some foreshadowing for something that will come up later on. And so you have that. I don't know. That's something that happens, and I guess I notice myself doing it too. I don't know when I just say something in the regular accent, whatever accent I'm using, and when I switch to the language of whatever the word or the phrase or thing that I'm saying. Okay, so what was his occupation? From the age 29, he was placed in charge of the Republic of Florence's foreign affairs in subject territories. Machiavelli had held a series of governmental posts. Among his tasks were to establish a militia, undertake diplomatic and military missions, oversee fortifications, and write an official history of the Republic. So in this sense, he was also kind of close to Che Guevara when it comes to that aspect of being involved in some militaristic activities. So I'm sure there's some arguments to be made to say that, hey, he wasn't so much different than Che Guevara. If he was in charge of a government that's planning those things or some sort of structure, then how much different is it than actually being a rebel leader out there? And some people had objections to stuff that Machiavelli was doing. Like apparently the Catholic Church banned him for 200 years because he said something about like being a good Christian was often incompatible with being a successful political leader. I don't know. And you could think of a current political leader in the United States of America who kind of got me to thinking of this and some of the his Christianity that is being questioned, with a particular not having put his hand on a Bible or saying certain statements about other religions or doing things at certain times during certain Christian kind of occasions, where I'm just like, as somebody who is a religious, doesn't really matter that much to me, but I can see if somebody is Christian taking it like events are noticing like, oh, he did put his hand on the Bible. I'm like, okay. So why am I reading How Dangerous It Is to Believe in Exiles, which is chapter 31 of the second book of Discourses of Niccolo Machiavelli on the first 10 books of Titus Livius to Zanobi Buondelmonti and Cosimo Rucellai. Okay. So I've been posting on rantdon.wordpress.com since I think 2008, and then I've been doing Dying Alive on YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey. Well, I added those later on, but I started my YouTube channel back in 2017, and there was a time when I was posting almost daily, and I let that off. But then now I'm coming back to focus more on my projects. What am I doing? Creating a storytelling platform. What do I need to be doing personally of the things I've been doing in the past in order to get back to making this something that is more productive and planned and organized in that sense? So one of the things I was wondering, should I get back to my political junkie ways? I'm still going to be a political junkie. Sociopolitics is my thing, and I'm a fan of that. But how much of that will I be including in what I'm actually putting out there and creating and focusing on? And to that end, I was thinking, with the recent thing happening in Iran, with the United States of America and Israel going in and attacking Iran, I think it's been going on for almost 5 weeks. I'm recording this in Nairobi, Kenya, in the morning at after the day when Trump was supposedly going to, because some people are believing too much of the things that Trump posts on his Truth Social about bombing all the bridges and all the power stations. But now there's a 2-week ceasefire between the United States of America and Iran, but not Israel somehow. I don't know how that works. I don't think I'm going to get back to the regular political commentary and analysis of ongoing social affairs, getting the information as soon as possible. Let me get my thoughts out there before somebody else says the thing. There's many people I listen to who I think are pretty good at that, who have good track records, who already end up saying things that I've been thinking of, been drafting in the Rantaton blog. So I might still post some of that stuff there. But what I want to focus more on these videos and other things that I'm doing out there, tying my art in, is the storytelling aspect. What about X thing makes it worth a story being told? What aspects of a story, what X part of the story do people focus on? And in this case, Why are certain X storytellers the people you're going to listen to over somebody else saying the same thing? And in this particular case, I think this was in a discussion by Scott Horton and Daryl Cooper in the Provoked podcast. They were talking about this, and this came up. This chapter came up because a lot of people were saying, oh, we need to support Trump because of what the people in the United States of America are saying about Iran, what the Iranians, former Iranians, the people who in many cases were exiled from Iran. And I think Resha Pahlavi, who is like the son of some royals in there, that's saying we should put them back in. And of course, he's a big advocate of ongoing military action to overthrow and regime change so he can step in or other people can change in there. So a lot of people have been saying, oh, you Americans who don't actually live in Iran are saying these, but these people who have been in Iran are saying this thing, they're saying we should support. So let's listen to these people because as people who have been in Iran, they know better. And I've never really bought that much. Even from my personal background, as I mentioned at the start, when I tell people, oh, you meet me when I'm in Italy, you meet me when I'm in the United States of America, maybe they met me when I was a kid in France, and they say, oh, I've met a Kenyan, I know how Kenyans actually are. I don't think that actually works because by the very fact that I am not physically in Kenya, will already set me aside from the majority of Kenyans who are living in Kenya and being affected by what it is like to live in Kenya on a day-to-day basis that will inform how they think about things and approach things and believe certain things. And then even when you break that down, the different tribes and different regions, and different locations, different classes, there's a lot of different things that are in there. So I don't think there's any extra. If anything, if you're basing what the average Kenyan is off of the person you met out there, you might get some small parts here and there of it, but it might actually skew you away from actually thinking of what actual Kenyans are like. And when it came to me, that's somebody who was a child of diplomats, so I was moving around as my parents were posted in different locations. When we're talking about these Iranians, these former Iranians living in the West that constantly being quoted and brought up, or they're being polled and this and that, that's normally a case of adults who chose to leave Iran and live in the West. So what do you think that self-selected group would actually feel about how it actually is to live in Iran? That already self-selects, and there are many people who could leave Iran that are actually choosing to stay in Iran. But now into the reading. Chapter 31, How Dangerous It Is to Believe Exiles. And it's at this point where I'm wondering, should I do some sort of accent or like, and it does not appear to me, and it does not appear to me to be foreign to this subject, to discuss among other matters how dangerous a thing it is to believe those who... No, I'm not going to do an accent. At least not one different from this default one that I fall into when I'm recording things like this. But yeah, back to the start. And it does not appear to me to be foreign to this subject to discuss among other matters how dangerous a thing it is to believe those who have been driven out of their country, these being matters that are acted upon each day by those who govern states. And I am especially able to demonstrate this by a memorable example given by T. Livius in his history, even though it may be outside his subject. When Alexander the Great crossed with his army into Asia, Alexander of Epirus, his brother-in-law and uncle, came with his forces. Brother-in-law and uncle. Okay, yeah. Had to think about that bit. There's no incest going on there. Back to the reading. When Alexander the Great crossed with his army into Asia, Alexander of Epirus, his brother-in-law and uncle, came with his forces into Italy, having been called there by the exiled Lucanians, who had given him the hope that he could through their means occupy all that province. Whence he, upon their faith and hope, having come into Italy, was killed by them, because they had been promised a return to their country by their citizens if they would kill him. It ought to be considered, therefore, how vain are the faith and promises of those who find themselves deprived of their country. For, as to their faith, it has to be borne in mind that any time they can return to their country by other means than yours, they will leave you and look to the other, notwithstanding whatever promises they had made you. As to their vain hopes and promises, such is the extreme desire in them to return home, that they naturally believe many things that are false and add others by art, so that between those they believe and those they say they believe, they fill you with hope, so that relying on them you will incur expenses in vain, or you undertake an enterprise in which you ruin yourself. The previously mentioned examples of Alexander is enough for me, but in addition, that of Themistocles the Athenian, who, having been declared a rebel, fled to Darius in Asia, where he promised him so much if he should want to assault Greece, that Darius turned to that enterprise. Themistocles, not being able to observe these promises, he poisoned himself, either from shame or from fear of punishment. And if this error was made by Themistocles, a most excellent man, it ought to be considered how much more those men err who, because of less virtue, allow themselves to be drawn by their desires and passions. A prince, therefore, ought to go slowly in undertaking an enterprise upon the representations of an exile, for most of the times he will be left either with shame or very grave injury. And as the taking of towns rarely succeeds by deceit or by intelligence others within may have, it does not appear outside the subject to discuss it in the following chapter, adding some account of how many ways the Romans acquired them. And that's it for the reading. The next chapter is chapter 32, in how many ways the Romans occupied towns, which actually could have some sense with this one, because now we're talking about if you're actually going to do a full-on Iranian change that some of the people who are outside of Iran have been talking about, would you definitely need boots on the ground? Not boots on the ground like that mission to take out the soldier, or some people are saying it was a failed attempt to go in and get the uranium out of Natanz or something. Now, I'm just talking about an outright, if you actually want a new regime, or how are you going to change it? Trump came out and said, now, is this true, is it not, that they dropped in some weapons to arm the rebels in Iran, and they were supposed to come out and take over, but the people they gave those weapons to, possibly the Kurds, have kept those weapons, and I don't know. So is that the boots on the ground that you need? You actually need actual people in there. People have said historically, like, there's no actual way you can have regime change just from air warfare, but then air warfare is changing, maybe some technology is changing, maybe other things can be added different way. You can use internet warfare, messaging warfare, and do things in that kind of sense. I don't know. There's a lot going on, but I might read this separately because it's more interesting stuff. I haven't read too much Machiavelli, and just might read more. And if I read more excerpts, I probably would post it with the same speed drawing of this actual thing. But yeah, so this is my whole estimation with this whole thing. Like, having lived in Iran or currently living in Iran does give somebody a different point of view than the people who are not in Iran or never lived there. But you can find people on both sides with that background of having lived in Iran or being in Iran that were supporting what the USA and Israel were doing, or against it. So that kind of cancels out, even though that does give a certain point of view. Even though this situation was focusing on Iran, and then of course the Israel lobby, the dreaded Israel lobby that is controlling the United States come up. This is not unique to the Middle East. It's not unique to any of these two countries, not unique to countries with I. This is a general thing. People leave certain countries and still have interest in those countries, and they get to the United States of America and the West and other countries in general and want to get people in those countries to do things to support the country that they're from in the ways and change that country, affect that country in a way that they find to be beneficial to themselves. But to finish this off, I'm going to go with the Thomas Sowell 3. I think Thomas Sowell is also one of the people I have on the Anyone But Che series. But he has these 3 questions he asks to the left politically about economics. But I've taken those 3 questions, also have merchandise for those that you can find on my Redbubble store. These 3 questions are: compared to what? At what cost? What solid proof do you have? And as I said, as an economist, he particularly uses this question about leftist policies, and it undermines their claims that whatever they're advocating for is a thing to do, or they just don't even have answers for these things. I found these questions useful to apply to other situations. Right now, I'm going to apply to listen to exiles about what they have to say about supporting the US, Israel, military, whatever they're calling it, against Iran. First question, compared to what? Exiles versus what? One of the cases could be people actually living in Iran. Let's assume you can actually access somebody talking in Iran and they're not under some coercion to say something in a certain way. Then if you're putting in some sort of importance and value of having been in Iran to the exiles, then the people still in Iran have higher value. But in reality, I'll listen to the exiles, I'll listen to whatever I can hear from people in Iran, I'll listen to the Iranian government, I'll listen to the US government, but I'm not going to take what any of these people say as the unvarnished truth and gospel of what is really going on and what is best to actually do and what I should support. But when it comes to an exile, I think that is somebody who is specifically targeted by the current people in sociopolitical power and influence, and they have to flee or they've been booted out. So they're already in loggerheads. They already have issues, pre-existing issues with that. So I think maybe some of the people were the people who just chose to leave. Maybe people who are moving back and forth. They might be people who would think, okay, that could be somebody in comparison to speak to more. But in my estimation, it doesn't necessarily have to be Italians. I'm not like Douglas Murray. I'm not a journalist who says I have to keep away, try not to speak. That's the thing. Douglas Murray just released a recent a recent article about Iran, and then there was a community note talking about how Douglas Murray, in his previous debate on Joe Rogan with Dave Smith, had said like, "Oh, you haven't been? You've never been? You've never been?" Talking about Israel, saying he tries not to speak about places or talk about places that he's never actually been. So he's never been to Iran. So the community note was like, Douglas Murray is posting this, but Douglas Murray has never been to Iran, even though he says he tries not to speak about places he's never been. Okay, so back to this. So you can talk to people who are in there. I don't think you have to have been to Iran. There's people with better track records who don't really have much to gain about what they're talking about Iran, besides their credibility about these topics. And that's the next question: at what cost? I think when it comes to the cost, what is the person standing to gain from making you believe what they're trying to tell you? Does it have to be true? An exile, as was mentioned in this chapter, could gain a lot if you go in there and overthrow the current system. They could gain the return home. That is a massive incentive for people to believe that they should have the people who are keeping them from being home taken out by whatever means possible. And that doesn't even mean these exiles who might believe this are right. You might take out the people right now, and the people who take over are even more against what you're going to do. What makes these exiles think that if you take out the current system, they will automatically be a system where the exiles can go back in? And then when you're talking about analysts, like I said, people in American politics, their politicians have certain things to say that benefit what they're doing. The Iranians have certain things to say that benefit what they're doing. You're not going to get actual truth and facts from these people, consistency, because if they just say one thing and something else happens, what is the actual cost to those people? In Iran, it's not like there's going to be a democracy all of a sudden that's going to take over the people who lied about how good Iran was fighting off or surviving the assault. And on the other aspect, it's the United States of America. Their government is just, who's going to, that whole Dave Chappelle skit, like, oh, the United Nations is against it. Oh, you in what army? Who's going to go in and actually hold any United States president or officials accountable for what they've done militarily? And even though Trump might be an exception to this, I don't see the whole warfare, welfare state thing being deposed right now and having the Democrats take power at the midterms. I think they probably will win the midterms, probably the House of Representatives and possibly the Senate. There's still months to that time, so some things could change, but I don't think Trump would be impeached specifically over carrying out a war with Iran, which the United States government has been talking about through multiple regimes and administrations for decades. So of course, they would lie about this. Last question, what solid proof do you have? They've already shown us, the people who are not living in Iran anymore, that they prefer not living in Iran. So there's something about Iran that they already don't like as much as the place that they're currently living in. Now, with the solid evidence, some of these things, times change over time quite fast in current timeline, the changes that happen. So how long has it been since they've been in Iran? Are they still in touch with the way things are actually going on in Iran? Do they know how strong the regime is? Do they know what the actual feelings are within the people? They've had all these years. Why didn't more people leave? If they left, then they're telling us about how most Iranian people are, but most Iranian people didn't leave. So is it possible that most Iranian people don't have the mentality that you had? And then even you solidly, you chose to leave rather than stay and fight there. So what makes you think, what solid evidence do you have that other people who stayed there, who are not currently fighting, will all of a sudden get up and risk their lives and fight, even though you chose to leave? Now, that's the people who chose to leave. Now, when it comes to exiles who are forced out, what evidence do they have that they could return there and actually manage and control this preferable system to the current system that's going on in there? And I am not somebody who's moving to Iran. Everything I've heard from the outside about Iran seems like a place I would not want to live. But I have no solid evidence that the way to change that to a preferential place is a military action of rubblization and decimation and execution and ending of lives that's been going on recently. Now, there certainly is a whole bunch of unknown known information. Like, I know there's a bunch of things that are unknown to me about the actual state of Iran that I think are also unknown to the exiles, also unknown to the people out there. There's things the US government knows. Trump has been exposed to certain information that we don't have. But I don't think those exiles have it either. I don't think the people who are bringing up what the exiles and former Iranians living in the West say about Iran know that other information. So that's it. My contention here is somebody who used to live in a place that no longer lives there for whatever reason might not be as authoritative a source of information or basing your point of view on what you can expect of the people actually living in said place. If anything, when it comes to a contentious departure from said location like exile, it's actually even more likely to be suspicious, or they will be telling you things that are off about the actual conditions in that place. And that's it about this little story of how an unprovoked war being discussed on the Provoked podcast led me to read How Dangerous It Is to Believe in Exiles as part of Niccolo Machiavelli being added to my Anyone But Che series, which is a series of things where I put on these designs with that really pleasantly aesthetic design of people that I think anyone but Che Guevara would be better in that design. And you can find links to the Redbubble store where you can buy that and other merchandise. There's also my blog, rantathon.wordpress.com, where I post daily. I'm up to 1,897 posts days in a row of posts. I will be keeping that up, and I'll be doing more on actual videos and art and things like that as I launch the storytelling platform I'm working on, and streamlining the things that I'm bringing out, increasing more conversations and things like that about topics. Yeah, I don't know. So that's it for now. Like, share, subscribe. This has been Silas. Till next time, goodbye.